the time leading up to Amazon Prime's Wheel of Time series, several troubling reports regarding the show left me a bit hesitant to dive in. However, after finally seeing the pilot episode, I feel that it presented me with more than enough to indicate where the series is heading, and unfortunately, it's to a place I don't want to go. While I'm not as familiar with the Wheel of Time as I am with other fictional properties, I admit I was intrigued at the prospect of getting to see Amazon's adaptation of Robert Jordan's fantasy world on screen. After hearing the initial news regarding the development of this series, I began to dive into the lore of the books in order to familiarize myself with the concepts and characters I might expect to see in the show. I tried to go in with as few expectations as possible, aside from a desire to see a mostly faithful adaptation which fell within the definitive boundaries of lore that Jordan built for this fantasy world. When I finally got around to watching it, I tried to keep an open mind, but that was nearly impossible as I heard the opening lines of the first episode. While I'm by no means a Wheel of Time lore expert, I knew that Robert Jordan established that the central figure of the series, called the Dragon Reborn, was widely known to be a man. However, the writers of the series changed this to leave it open for a person of either sex to fill this role. This turned out to be a clear indicator of what was to come. If they were willing to change something as fundamental as the known sex of the Dragon Reborn, what else would they be willing to change? As I watched the rest of the first episode, it became clear that the producers of the series were using the books as more of a rough draft as opposed to a definitive source of knowledge. It's been my observation that the best adaptations of fantasy properties have been produced with a supreme reverence of the source material, and it's apparent that this isn't one of those cases. While certain changes need to happen in any book-to-screen adaptation, it's not out of line for fans of the property to expect the show to stay true at least to the spirit of the novels. It's my opinion that the production team involved with Amazon's Wheel of Time simply wanted to use the author's work as an avenue to make their own version of Game of Thrones. One major change that I felt demonstrated this was the injection of mature content into the series. In the books, the main characters act far more innocent when it comes to romantic intimacy. However, the TV series dives headlong into depictions of the sexual lives of these same characters. While I've seen plenty of complaints about scenes that were not included in the show, I find that the content that was chosen to be depicted on screen was a far more egregious cause for complaint. At first, I thought the addition of Perrin's wife was odd. However, when I was made to realize the purpose of introducing this character that was never in the books, I was disgusted. Many have accused this change as a representation of the misogynist trope called fridging, wherein a male character's love interest is killed off for the sole purpose of driving his development. I must say, however, that I was much less offended by the addition of this trope as I was by the manner of her death. In what was already proving to be an overly long, drawn-out action sequence, the gory death of Perrin's wife was so over-the-top and revolting that it left me numb for the rest of the episode. I understand that in the process of adapting a dense source material, some changes have to be made to condense the story to fit this new format. But what should be preserved are the core elements of each character and their journeys, as that will ensure that the spirit of the source material shines through. The fact that fundamental changes to characters' backstories were made in this adaptation without any other reason but to add needless sex and gratuitous violence is incredibly disrespectful to the author's work and demeaning to the fans as well. Audiences can generally sense when writers are being lazy, and the whole first episode felt like a plodding attempt to adapt this material in a way that resembled the dark and mature tones found in Game of Thrones. And therein lies the real problem. You can't shoehorn other fantasy properties into the mold of Game of Thrones and expect it to be a success. Wheel of Time is a well-established series in its own right, and it's unique enough to earn its own look and feel. It seems that the showrunners and creators had no real sense of how to approach this adaptation, in particular when it comes to dialogue and establishing the world-building elements. They somehow managed to turn this intricate high fantasy series into a dull show with garbled tones. While I admit some of the scenery throughout the show was truly beautiful, the gore and over-the-top violence presented on screen really left me soured on the whole experience. But more importantly, by the end of the first episode, I found myself not caring about any of the characters, with no inclination to watch the continuation of their stories. Even Brandon Sanderson, the author who finished the Wheel of Time saga after Robert Jordan's passing, who also served as a consulting producer for the show, found fault with the premiere episode for several of the same reasons. Among several other complaints about the show, Sanderson took issue with the killing of Perrin's wife just for the sake of being edgy, as well as it being another example of the disposable wife trope, and saying, quote, "Perrin killing his wife, then going off on an adventure really bothers me even still." He continued saying that he didn't want this Wheel of Time adaptation to lean into being a tonal Game of Thrones replacement with its grimdark ideas. He stated, quote, "It feels like the story is trying really hard to say, look, we can be like Game of Thrones. Notice how like Game of Thrones we can be. That's not letting it be itself, or be the Wheel of Time, which has light sequences and characters who are genuine friends and strong world building." For fans of the series, I'm certain there are countless other changes that were made in this adaptation that are cause for concern and offense. However, the elements I pointed out, and the overall focus on creating a darker, Game of Thrones-like tone, completely ruined any desire I have to see more from Amazon's take on Robert Jordan's work. My issues with this series are further compounded by the sheer mountain of articles I see online attempting to excuse a continual stream of changes being made from the source material as new episodes of the series are released. All of this considered, it's clear to me that the creative directors of this series looked at Robert Jordan's work not with an eye on what they could faithfully bring to the screen, but instead on what they needed to change in a misguided attempt to improve the story, appropriate it, and make it their own. This approach comes across as supremely disrespectful of the original author and the fans of the books who purely wanted to see a faithful depiction of the story they love. While producing a fantasy series is certainly never an easy task, I feel like one of the critical failures with Amazon's Wheel of Time is the idea on the part of the showrunners that it's acceptable to play fast and loose with a story that is so well known. And with all the changes that have been made in the first few episodes, it seems that they've shaken off and lost quite a few viewers and fans. Sadly, when considering all the historical difficulties that have come from previous attempts to get the story on screen, I feel like this is probably the only live-action adaptation that audiences will get of these books for some time to come. And with a series that has strayed so far from the source material, the damage done appears to be pretty much unsalvageable. As is the case with all book-to-screen adaptations, I'm happy to know that the true beauty of Robert Jordan's unique universe will forever live on in his writings. But I'm curious to know, what do you think of Amazon's Wheel of Time? Do you agree with my assessment of the series? What do you think of Brandon Sanderson's comments? Are there any changes that Amazon made from the books to the screen that you had an issue with? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more sci-fi and fantasy news and lore. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.